I got it.
This meeting is being recorded.
Cool. All right, that worked. That's a positive thing. So hello, everyone. Sorry for the inconvenience. Like everything, you never know when your system goes down. So welcome, everyone. We'll see if more people attend as we go through. I do have an interesting proposition to present to everyone. So I'm going to lead up to it. So those that were part of this community at the beginning, I'm going to kind of review kind of where we started to rationalize a proposal. So go to the next slide. So those that remember back in the day when we started this, we kind of had a structure, and we were going to go through these items you see in front of you. And we made the supposition or proposition that Agile or Agile Enterprise or doing and being Agile included high-performing teams, happiness, Scrum, or XP, or whatever framework you're doing, design thinking or innovation, and DevOps, TestOps, and SecOps, which is now DevSecOps. And then, you know, the associated frameworks. So that was our supposition. And we actually did for a whole year, those that were participating in the San Francisco Bay Area, we had different sites, and we would talk about each one of these subjects and topics and how they integrated to create Agile at a large organization or enterprise that is trying to figure out how to connect the dots. So that's what we did. Next slide. And the way we did it, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Integral Agile. So we kind of took that organizational structure, that ecosystem, and we kind of walked through the quadrants that Integral Agile uses. And if you look at the top right, it generally starts with, you know, practices and tools and Agile humanity, and then organizational culture and Agile environment. And the idea is that you have to harmonize these and interconnect them. And that we talked a lot about that, and how most companies just focus on the top right quadrant without interconnecting the other quadrants, and why most Agile transformations or implementations do not yield the results that people expect. Let's go to the next slide. And then we introduced this notion of the Agile ecosystem. We introduced this notion of the dark Agile. So, you know, things go sideways and it gets dark sometimes. You know, the next slide. And we come up with patterns. These are the patterns. I'm not going to go through them a lot. We talked about each pattern that consumed this dark Agile, that limited our ability to be successful. Go to the next page. And we talk about each one of like technocentric. So there's a whole group of Agile implementations. We just focus on the technology side of the house, and you know, the coolest tool chain that we can get in, and the coolest shiny object of automation and tools, which is important, but you know, that's not the only thing you got to focus on. Next slide, please. And then we had groups out there and companies and everything, which, you know, I kind of labeled self-absorbed, where they had, you know, their view of reality, whether it's safe or less or whatever their thinking is of the right way or the wrong way to do things, and they pressured the agile humanity side of the house to actually follow their philosophy and their thought pattern. Next slide, please. And then eventually what happened, which is very funny because we talked about this many years ago, augmented reality. So those that are familiar with Meta now and Facebook, I think it's just so funny that this has come to fruition where we now have VR and AI, and we're now looking at the augmentation of reality and making a lot of coin and money off of that. So that is another thing where organizational culture environments, we actually don't really do it practically. We make stuff up. This comes to organizational design and really doing stable, persistent teams versus not. And most companies do the not. Next slide, please. And the laissez-faire, which I kind of like this one. Well, just organically, it will happen. Hey, let's not push anything on it. Just work with people and magic will happen. Next slide. And then there's people out there who want to, just like the grand unified theory of physics and everything, they want to have one ring, masters all other rings, and this is the obvious solution to everything in the world, which doesn't exist. So that's kind of, go to the next slide. That was the notion back during when we started this community, was there's a lot of dark agile going on, and that we wanted to focus on those areas that I talked about earlier to kind of pull all them together. And then we had these focus areas that we talked a lot about, which is, many books have been written about this now, and many organizations and communities have been fostered and created to do this. So what I'm going to talk about today is the notion that we're at the next paradigm shift or the next evolutional cycle in agile transformation and agile implementation, where we have to include complexity science and chaos engineering. So that's, long story short, based on our journey, this is where I'm going to propose this assumption that now for an agile enterprise to be sustainable as an agile enterprise, they have to adopt these practices and mechanisms around complexity science and chaos engineering. So let's talk about that. Next slide, please. So I'm proposing a roadmap, just like we had back in 2017 and 2018, where we're going to, those that want to be involved, talk about how we can or should include complexity science and chaos engineering. And the three phases is learning, the application, and the innovation of it. So I'll talk more about that. Next slide, please.
Hey, Jay, when you lean back, you get faint. You get faint.
Oh.
Your audio gets faint.
Okay, is this better?
Yep.
All right, cool. All right, so let's talk about what this complexity and complexity or complex adaptive system, that's what CAS stands for. So so a system is a network, and there's coherence around the network. It's fuzzy, but it could be a network of anything, and it's basically manifested in organic systems. And there's an agent that acts on the system, if you will. Next slide. I'm going to go through these really quickly. So there's, a system is a network, and there's coherence with a system, like we said, but there's three types. There's ordered, chaotic, and complex. I'm going to, go a little bit more detail on each one of them. Next slide. So in the complex adaptive systems now, we look at this picture that's on the left. I think it's a good one in a sense that it's saying that for us to make sense of the world and to understand how to deal with complex systems, which is people and organizations and culture, we have it's nonlinear. There's no prescribed mechanism or process that you can follow step by step by step that will end the results that you need to have a fully agile enterprise or a fully functional organization. And it's multi-scalar, scalar, so that means that there's multiple scaling systems to determine how you're evolving. It's unpredictable. We don't know enough information. It's a lot of probing and responding. It's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of self-reinforcement, feedback loops. I would also say there's a lot of bias in the mechanisms and the systems in the network. There's complex outcomes. It's multidisciplinary, which we call an agile, cross-functional teams. The connectivity and relationships in the networks is complex. There's many connections and relationships. It's emergent. That's the most important thing. In complex systems, since there's a lot of unknowns, we go out and we experiment and figure things out and probe, and ideas and the way of working and the solutions emerge over time. And it could be chaotic and stochastic. So on the right-hand side, it kind of shows some of the major type of practices we use out there in the world right now. And that's, collective behavior, game theory, nonlinear dynamic system theory. We use system theory a lot, and pattern formation. So these are kind of the techniques and practices we use for CAS. Next slide, please. So the most promising and the most used out there to make sense out of all this is the Canavan framework. How many of you are familiar with the Canavan framework? And Dave Snow. Nobody?
Yeah, I think most of us are, Jay.
Okay, I was going to say. Yeah, if you're not, I would recommend it's a good thing to do some research on. But the idea here is that for us to make decisions in the world and to solve problems in the world, we have to determine what area or domain we're working in. What's the problem, or what is the universe that we're dealing with? And what Dave kind of did is he kind of broke it down into these quadrants. So the lower right-hand one is the simple quadrants, the best practices. So basically what he's saying is that this is repeatable. You can figure out what to do. There's a handbook on it. Maybe project management is good for you. That's best practices. Good practice up there, that's the complicated domain. And that's where, okay, it's a little bit more complicated now. It's not as simple. We have to maybe resort on going and getting experts and consultation, or some patterns or frameworks like Scrum or whatever to figure out how to do this well. The other one is complex. That's the emergent complex domain. That's where we're too many unknowns. We can't just apply a framework or some kind of repeatable practice because we don't know enough. And then the novel is the one you see down there, and that's where we act, sense, and respond. And this is, on the innovative side. So that's kind of, I'm simplifying it. I'm going to talk about the Canavan framework a little bit more. Next slide, please. So you will see there's, known, knowable, complex, and chaos. And what happens in most companies and organizations, they're always going back and forth between all these domains. Just think about it. If you're working for a big company, like I am, we're always going back and forth on all these domains depending upon what we're doing. And there's a link. We'll get this uploaded to our site and send it to everyone. But this is pretty normal where we go back and forth between these different domains to figure out how to solve our solutions in a company. I would argue that most software engineering stuff that we do and most agile stuff like Scrum and Kanban and SAFe and LESS and all that is in the complicated or knowable domain or the known domain, not in the complex and chaos domain. Generally, those kind of practices and frameworks do not work very well in the complex and chaos domains. Next slide, please. So what's happening, and I know y'all probably know this, it's on this call, in the VUCA world, what we have to deal with a lot is complexity. So the problem we have is that a lot of times we're trying to apply what we do from a pattern point of view in the complicated and the simple domain to complex problems. And we're surprised when it doesn't yield the results that we expect, right? So when we're dealing with volatility, ambiguity, uncertainty, and complexity, we have to be careful in what we choose to apply in those kind of problems and those kinds of domains of opportunity. Next slide. So, Dave came up with sense making. So now sense making and pre-sensing is a very popular thing nowadays. I do recommend that if you have not heard of those terms and what they mean and how to use them, to research them, because they're becoming more and more evidential and more popular today as we deal with more and more complex problems like, COVID-19. Next slide, please. This is just another example of the domains that he came up with. Now, most of what we do in software engineering is very ordered. And once we get requirements, if you will, even if we do Scrum or iterative or incremental software development, we still do it in an ordered fashion. And we still have a mechanism by which we define the requirements and put them in a backlog, and we pull back the onion, if you will, and learn every iteration on what we're doing, or sprint. In the complex domain, you can't do that. There's insufficient knowledge to know, so that's where more experimentation is done and probing, design thinking, and other techniques and more scientific research. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just another view of it. Next slide. So that is complex adaptive systems, using the Canadian framework to help understand how to pull that together. The next thing I see, this is important, is chaos engineering. I don't know how many of you all listen to the video. So I put two videos there where Dave is talking about agile wilding and so forth, and another video where a gentleman from Google was talking about chaos engineering. Did anyone watch those videos? I recommend that you do. They're in the meetup. You can click on the link. Chaos engineering has really evolved with SREs and so forth right now, but it's moving just like Agile moved from software engineering and IT into pure business. So now, like, there's Agile HR and Agile marketing and so forth. There's no software at the end, but they're still using Agile or Scrum or Kanban to do business operations work. Chaos engineering is the same thing. It started with the software started out and technology, and then figuring out how we can create chaos in our environments and then learn from it. Now it's moving from the software or environments to the people, the organizations and teams. And the secret sauce here is, how do we test excuse me, that our organization is agile and adaptive? For example, if I have a team and they're working really well together, and I take the best developer and coder out of that team for 3 months, what happens to the team? That's a form of chaos engineering testing. Next slide, please. And chaos engineering is very, very ingrained in distributed systems. And it's not distributed systems, the software and the components and the architecture and the hardware and so forth. It's the people. Most companies now have teams where people on the teams are distributed across the world. And chaos engineering, we always try to find out what happens if we disrupt that normal play or that normal distribution of work and teams. So in systems, we write code so it can recover. And we have code and technology that allows us to do things like really cool things to recover and have redundant systems, right? And it's the same thing with a digital twin, for example, getting very popular in manufacturing. Well, we're trying to figure out in the same way how to do that with people and organizations. So if we disrupt something in the organization or in the teams from a chaos engineering point of view, what do we learn from that? How does the teams or the people adjust accordingly to still be able to produce and be predictable and work together? So that's we're seeing more and more of that today. Next slide, please. So this leads to the whole notion of hyper-performing teams. So if pretending I have the magic wand, and if I can say that we're going to work with complex problems and we're going to have a team that works with those complex problems and issues where I can't use Scrum or some pattern, right? And at the same time, they learn how to work together. They're a high-performing team. What happens if I throw chaos engineering in there and do some disruption on the team? What happens? This is the true test of Agile and adaptability. It's the test of the people. And we experienced that the last 2.5 years with the pandemic. Companies and people had to change, and they had to change quickly, and they still had to be high or hyper-performing teams. They had to figure it out. And lo and behold, many companies in the world did. And they were very successful. So some companies actually experimented with this. For example, what would happen if a pandemic happened and you had to work virtually from home? They found out several years, like 3 or 4 years before the pandemic really happened, that the technology was not at the stage or the state they needed for them to be hyper-performing and work virtually. So when the pandemic really happened, those organizations were probably a little better off because they kind of figured out what they need to do. But it's one of those things. It's like complex domain. If the technology or the solution is there, then what are you going to do? Next slide, please. So IBM did a study. I worked for IBM for 20 years, and it's not even close. When they measured, the differences between team performance and how they can deal with complexity and everything, you can see the numbers here. It was phenomenal difference. So there's something going on. Why? And then Google did a whole search. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Aristotle Project and psychological safety. There was a lot of research, and MIT did it, as well as Harvard and other companies. Well, why? Why do some companies and some people and some teams do better than others? Go to the next slide, please. So what they found is that, teaming is important. It's about the team. It's not necessarily about the individual contributor, although individual contributors are very important. They have to have enabling structures. They have to have compelling direction. They have to have psychological safety, which John Holland didn't find that, but they did find that out at the Google study. Next slide, please. So then what happened is people got together, like Dean Leffingwell, Craig Larman, Sutherland, everyone, and they said, hey, we got the answer. The answer is you got to change your organization. You got to have stable, permanent teams, and we have a way to do it. We're going to go in there and we're going to shift your organization around. You're going to do Scrum or Safe or Less or whatever, and we're going to tackle the problem at stake and make you more agile, more efficient from a lean point of view, and all that cool stuff, which works really well in the complicated and simple domain. It does not work in the complicated domain. Next slide, please. So then companies said, well, wait a minute. We actually have a bifurcated dichotomy of a company. We have to invest in keeping the company running. And that's the complicated kind of simple domain. We got to keep it running, figure out something, install SAP, get that up and running, organize our people. But at the same time, we've got to invest in innovation. We don't have a clue. We have to do some experimentation. We have to do some design thinking. We have to find out what the market wants, what our customer wants. And they keep changing their mind, what they want and what they don't want, right? Or we're trying to solve a significant problem in the world. And how do we do that? Governments deal with that a lot and the social fabric of certain countries, right? And we have big problems in the world, big wicked problems of how to solve, our economic and equality problems, as well as, the world burning up and going away. So how do we do that? How do we invest in that as a company and grow our products and be disruptive and create new stuff that's never existed before, and at the same time invested enough money to keep the company running? Yeah. So this is a dilemma for most companies. So the innovation side of the house is generally dealing with the complex domain. And when we come into a company and do agile transformation, we're dealing with organizations and people. Anytime you deal with people, you're dealing with the complex domain. Next slide, please. So what I'm proposing is an experiment for those that want to participate. And that focus, what we call an IBM, is the first of a kind. And so that's what I'm proposing to everyone. And then I'll also extend it to others. So next slide, please. So we call it a grand challenge in IBM. So IBM did this Deep Blue, Gene, and Watson, and they have another one they're doing right now. So my proposition to those on the call and anyone else that you may know is, how can we take complexity science and chaos engineering, and how can we make that a critical or integral part of an agile enterprise or an agile transformation? And the mission is learn how to apply it as part of an agile transformation. Next slide, please. So I'm proposing that we have 3 months of learning sessions. May will be the learning, which I'll talk about in a minute. June will be, okay, how do you apply it? And then July will be a discussion about the innovation results. Next slide, please. So these are the topics. So the idea here is that those who want to participate, they would select a topic. Here's the topics. I'll talk about them in a second. It's very simple. In May, we would just prepare one question on your topic, and you bring it to the session with everybody. And you'd also prepare one answer to a question that someone may ask in May. I put that there. I thought that was funny. To the topic that you're on. The items to the left are the topics. So what I'm asking is that if you want to participate, that you do a little research in any of these items you see. And the idea would be that you do a little research and a little thinking on one of those round circles that you have no experience in or no idea of what it is. So for example, if you know what the Canavan method and framework is, then maybe you wouldn't pick that one, but you would pick maybe like Theory U or complex adaptive system. And then, you know, research a little bit about it, learn about it, and then come to the May session with the number 2 and number 3. So I did this on purpose because, believe it or not, there's connections between each one of those round circles. So complex adaptive system is probably the science and the theory that kind of starts the thinking and the cognitive way of looking at things. And then Theory U, has anyone heard of Theory U before? It's relatively new. So can you see this?
There is one hand raised in the chat.
Excellent.
Now two.
Maru, cool. Can you see my book?
Oh yeah, I went through the whole curriculum of social presencing with the man himself.
Oh,
I'm a
cool.
systems thinking guy, hard and dry.
Oh, so you went with Otto. So is your brain still in your head?
It's I'm a systemic management coach too, but also PhD in AI. So I'm a bit of a multiple personality guy. So I loved all the my colleagues would call that esoteric stuff. I just tell them, just try it. You will see what it will do to you and to your whole system. The only thing that I see could be added here is the 5th discipline teaching.
I didn't purposely add that because the Singularity University kind of talks about that when they talk about exponential change and growth, and they talk a little bit about the 5th discipline, but maybe I should have put that on. But yeah, but the Theory U, I'm so happy that you have that experience and everything, and it is a deep subject. I mean, if you read this book, believe me, it's you have to read several pages 2 or 3 times.
I mean, it's
At
still
least
an
I have
ongoing,
to.
it's still an ongoing experiment. The guy has been doing that for several decades, and he's still running that. I mean, it's
I
not,
know.
it's not finished research. It's still ongoing.
Yeah, and that's what I'm suggesting here. I'm suggesting an experiment and a research of that those who want to participate, and there's a couple others I'm working with, to kind of figure out, to be honest, how to connect the dots. Okay. So look, the world is complicated. Companies are complicated. What we're trying to do as far as provide solutions and answers is complicated, and people are complicated. So the notion here is that there's some dots that connect between these ways of thinking. That's the notion. So the idea would be those who want to participate, they would pick one of these, and probably Mario, I wouldn't have you pick Theory U because you probably know it really well. So I'd pick something else that's new. And then you would pick chaos engineering, for example, and you do some research on that. And I'm going to create a Google Drive and put stuff out there to get you started. And you can read something or look at it and do some analysis or some research on it. You go, oh, well, these 3 things in chaos engineering, they're completely aligned to these 3 things in Theory U. And it makes sense. You would want to do those things as we create an agile enterprise and as we create the modern organization or target organizational model of the future. Does that make sense? Or am I just spouting craziness here? Is this too much for everyone? This is not your typical meetup.
No, this is exciting, Jay. It's very innovative.
All right, so let's go to the next slide. So here's my experiment hypothesis. Most people will not want to participate. That's a given. Okay, everyone's very busy. Everyone has their own life and interests. The other hypothesis is Socratic and dialectic learning is superior to the standard learning. So going to a class or to a college, or you're in a company and then you go to a class and you get your badge or whatever, and you learn stuff through the standard way. My hypothesis is if we participate over the next 3 months in a more Socratic and dialectic approach with the topics I suggest, we're going to learn more. Number 3, the participants will yield better learning and networking results using this dialectic and Socratic approach. Number 4, it increased the probability of a practical innovation outcome result. In other words, all of our brains put together in this complex domain can think of some really cool stuff that can benefit others in the world. So that's my hypothesis. Next slide, please. So the participation basics are this. If you want to participate, send me your email, your contact information to my email. There it is. And we can put it in the chat, but it's also in Meetup. Then I will provide you access to Google Drive and a whole bunch of information. We can talk. I'm going to create a mural place for us to collaborate. You can do it as teams or as individuals. And we're going to have fun and have some meaningful results. And I always look at the 4 C's at everything I do. Some level of comprehensiveness, some level of coherence, some level of cohesion, and it has to be concise. We can't, we're not writing War and Peace here. Next slide. And that's it. So now I'm done talking. Now I'll entertain anyone else that wants to talk, or any questions or any comments whatsoever. I know this is not your typical meetup. I've been doing this for many years, and I decided to change it up. So this may not work. So so I'd like to hear from what everyone thinks.
Thanks, Gervais. Well, I'll break the ice. I'm very biased, so what you presented aligns very much with my understanding, my research, my own writings, and my practice. My background was in strategy consulting for 8 years, and before that I was a researcher. I did a PhD and a postdoc in AI and model-driven engineering, a branch of software engineering. So I was heavily techicized until I discovered systemic coaching, which was very much influenced by the Palo Alto School, by Gregory Bateson and Virginia Satir. So the people who do that in my class were all psychotherapists. That broke my mind, totally destroyed my thinking and my perception. I had to reconstruct myself over the following 3 years and try to understand what that meant. I'm still not there yet, and so I delved into systemic. I call it systemics. Some people call it systemic management or systemic coaching or systems thinking. I just call it systemics because it's very broad. It's as broad as Agile, if not worse. Many practices, many styles, and that's what I recognize here. My own takeaway is simple. When you don't know what you're dealing with, what you're trying to solve, when you don't even know what you're trying to do, maybe it's not even a solution. One of the strategies you can try is evolutionary, which is you build models that allow you to simplify. You know that these models are wrong by definition. They try to give you a perspective so that you can work with it. And with each model come several tools. And so you go on with that throughout your life until you cannot anymore, and you keep learning and keep improving, and that's it. I don't have any better story to this. So thanks, Gervais.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so I'll just let y'all know what's happening in the world today with artificial intelligence and machine learning and data science and data analytics, and pulling all those together. What they're trying to do, just like we did with Watson and everything else, they're trying to solve complex problems. That's the whole point of machine learning and AI. It really is, right? And it's all about them getting access to a rich amount of data to be able to do that, right? So just take that in consideration. Anyone else wants to tell me how crazy I am?
Jay, as I said, you're very innovative. The 3 steps that you have laid out, it's broad. So if there can be some kind of guardrails or templates that you can provide, that would help. Because if you take the case of, learning, experiment, questions, and all that, there is no end to it.
Well, that's a good point, though, Paul. I purposely did that because in the complex domain, you have no structure, no process, nothing you can rely upon. It's all about probing and response. So it's all about data collection, information, and narrative collection. to determine the space you're in. It's to reduce the number of unknowns. So there is no, so I can't say, follow this pattern like Scrum or follow this pattern like design thinking. That's the whole experiment. You got to come up with your own pattern. Does that make any sense?
Maybe I should have more wine.
Good call, Gopal.
Yeah. So for example, so they used to be, so Dave used to call his company Cognitive Edge. Now it's Canavin Company or whatever. And they have a tool called the Sense Maker. So in theory, you it's called pre-sensing. And in what Dave does, everything, it's all about sense making, which is very popular right now. So what they do is they have a whole methodology or process with a tool where they go out there. It's like ethnography study, where they go out there and ask these questions, and they get narrative information back from people, and they have a bunch of AI and machine learning behind it that goes and finds patterns in the narrative results to determine insights on specific things that they're looking at. Like, how come young people at a certain age and a certain demographic did not succumb to COVID-19? Yeah, there's a DNA component to that, but what else is happening? What's the narrative? What's the social construct there? And there was a lot of data that came from that to determine those parameters that made a difference, if you will. I just throw that out there. There's a lot of cool things that we do in medicine and other financial banking and so forth, where we look at these patterns of human behavior and complexity in economic markets, for example. And can we, a lot of times we can't, can we extract some patterns or insights that we can use to then make better decisions or make life better for people? So that's where this is going. I don't know if that makes sense, or did I just confuse things more? This is not your typical software engineering discussion, but I guess I could, Ron, talk about it in a software engineering perspective, right? So when I worked with the team in IBM to develop Watson and everything, there was a lot of unknowns. We had to analyze the data, and we had to write code to determine these relationships with the data, and then we had to write code for the machine to interpret it and learn it and store it in these certain collections. And then they would start reading a story, and then the machine would store the learning of what they learned from the collection of the data into a certain repository or a certain memory, so they could pull it out when they got the next pattern that made sense, that they could make sense out of it. So believe it or not, that's what we do in machine learning. It's a lot of unknowns that we try to figure out. Ron, do you have any examples?
You're asking me?
Ron.
Oh, Ron.
Oh. Nope, the Knifin thing is fascinating, but I haven't gone down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. So you haven't worked with anyone writing that weird code in machine learnings and AI yet?
Yes, but yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm at a higher level than that. Higher level as in, 10,000 feet.
Ah. And that's where I'm trying to get us to be too, to be honest with y'all. I'm not trying to get down to the coding. I'm trying to get down to or up to the organization, the culture, and the thinking patterns that we can bring. So for example, if I'm doing an agile transformation, I'll be very specific. If I'm doing an agile transformation, I'm just gonna say I'm implementing the Scaled Agile framework. And I started some arts. Let's say this team feels very comfortable. They've been doing this for like a year. And the team is pretty, predictable, right? They're doing pretty good. They got DevOps going really well. Holy crap. They got the tool chain going. They got, they can push the code to the different environments, right? Well, what would happen if I came in there with a chaos engineering experiment and disrupted their world? How would they respond? It's a test. It's a real test, like the military does.
So why would we want to do that?
Why the hell would we want to do that, right?
So, pretty much every study not only says psychological safety, but stable teams. So why do you want to disrupt? Why do you want to disrupt stable teams?
I don't want to disrupt the teams. I want to see how they respond to shit.
When they're not stable. When they're not
stable.
Let's
say they're stable. Let's just say they're stable. Let's go there first. Let's go there first.
Go where? I'm sorry. I'm just, what?
Let's say they've been stable for a year or more. Okay. A year. And they're good. I mean, holy crap. They're highly productive, low defect count, defect density. They're good. Okay. What would happen if I came in there and said, okay, the system went down, or you migrated some code, you turned some feature flags on and they didn't work, or I take 2 or 3 people off the team and put them somewhere else.
That's now you're blowing up the stable team.
Exactly.
Why do you want to blow up a stable team?
See what happened.
For experimentation? No. Don't do that for experimentation.
Yeah, well, that's what Google does. Believe it or not, they've done that several times with teams. And
Google's got enough money; they can afford to do that. They can afford to be stupid.
That's right. So like the company I work for, they probably would never do that. But it was proctored. It was proctored. What I mean by proctored, it was an experiment with a hypothesis. This is what we wanted to observe with this experiment, with this complexity notion, to see what would happen. For example, would the team be able to inspect and adapt and recover and go forward, or would they fall apart, right? Or any other variation thereof. And they wanted to find out, by definition, how adaptive and agile is the team. By definition. By definition, you can't really test. This is the hypothesis. You can't really test the extreme adaptability or agility of the team unless something really bad happens.
But why would you want to do that in a business?
Huh?
Why would you want to do that in a business? I could see wanting to do it like if you're like a military or something like that.
Yeah.
Or a university.
Right. Well, I'll say COVID-19. Those companies that did this experiment to see how they could work virtually before COVID-19 happened, and they figured out that didn't work and how they had to fix it, were able to recover when COVID-19 happened and be more distributive and more virtual, faster than companies who didn't even have an inkling in their brain and tested it. That's the argument. That's the argument that people have.
Could you mute Kenneth, please? Do you have that power?
Okay, what?
Can you mute Kenneth? There's some noise.
Oh,
He's just been muted.
Yeah,
all
thank
right,
you.
cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
But okay, COVID, okay.
Companies, there's 4 companies that did that in the world. And they were able to recover and do stuff a lot faster than any other companies. Now, would most of us, look, I work for a company that's very regulated. Most of us would never have been able to test that or do anything to even prepare for that, right? So that's an exception to the rule, right? But let's say Amazon did this. What would happen if my environment went down and no one could freaking order books? It's a joke. And I know what happened.
Oh, that's a valid
Can
thing to test.
I know they did this actually. If I brought the team in, the red team, could they find the problem and get it up? Now, look, I had a team right back here that can get it up in 2 hours. Okay. If I brought the red team in that I trained, can they get it up in 2 hours? Would a company, most companies would never do that. Amazon did it once. Okay. Most companies would never do that. So yes, there's a balancing act here, right? But I think my notion is more not talking about bringing down environments and messing around with people. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, how do we deal with complex problems in the world? Not complicated problems, not simple problems. We have to go and probe and respond and get data and figure out what to do. We don't have, there's too many unknowns. I can't just say, oh, go use Scrum, go use Kanban, go use lean software engineering. Frickin', I don't know. I have to go find out what the problem is before I can come up with the potential solutions to use. That's really what I'm talking about. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So every company out there has these problems. Okay, the company I'm working for right now has to come up with molecules and medicines to solve serious illnesses that human beings have. Okay, they're dealing every day with the complexity of, okay, how do I do that? How do I solve diabetes? How do I solve Alzheimer's? Right?
By running a set of experiments, right?
Exactly. So that's what I'm getting to, really, to be honest with you, is how do we run these sets of experiments and then take the data and use it using ML or AI or whatever. And then using that information and data and then saying, oh, I see a pattern. Oh, if we do this and do that, I can see how we can go to the next stage, right? Or we can learn from it and then take some insight and use it going forward, right? It's really the key of innovation, right? So that's my quest. My quest, if I look at agile transformations and I say, okay, this company's agile. We define it, we measure it. Cool. What's the litmus test of that company being agile? Did they respond really well to COVID-19? Do they respond very well to a competitor that's trying to take their customers and market away from them? Did they respond very well to, you name it, complex issues that pop up, disruption? And do they innovate and then come up with solutions for complex problems in the world and society? So that's my hypothesis. How do we frickin' do that as an agile enterprise? Maru, do you have a question?
No, don't worry. No.
This probably sounds like theoretical BS, doesn't it? But I guarantee you, companies deal with this all the time. The executives deal with this all the time.
Just wanted to share a story I heard today from one coach at a very, very famous, I don't want to name any names, consulting company. He told me about the story where he was an agile coach, an enterprise agile coach, and he didn't know that their resilience was being tested, and their PO refused the work that they did after 6 individual sprints, and they kept at it, but they didn't know. He didn't know, the team didn't know. But he also said that the team and the culture in the company was such that you could do such an experiment. They already had a foundation, a basis. The system that you're going to test like this around resilience, if it's too fragile, especially if it thinks it's agile, and it's totally delusional, like a lot of teams, like, oh yeah, we're awesome, we do agile. And in the first test you do, you break them, that's counterproductive. You're not going to gain anything from that. So there is a lot of factors to be included in doing this stuff. And also there is a whole discipline of people doing this. I don't know why it's not in the mainstream. It's called red teaming. A whole group of people get certified. A whole group. I did the foundational courses, and I mean, really, you wouldn't imagine how many people come to the workshops. I don't know why it's not in the mainstream. Maybe they don't do meetups. I don't know.
Yeah, IBM, we kind of created red teams back in the 80s and 70s. So very popular. We also created the notion of shift left, which is becoming very popular now. But that, you know, every time I turn around, there's a new thing. I'm learning all the freaking time. Right? I can remember story mapping came out. I was like, oh, this is cool. So there's always new stuff coming out all the time to deal with complexity and to deal with the problems we've got to solve, right? And people, you know, are innovative, right? And they come up with it. But I guess my question is, look, how many of y'all do maturity assessments on teams and organizations? Do any of y'all do that? Maru, you do it? You know, that's popular today. People, there's tools that help you do team assessment, portfolio assessments, role assessments, organizations, and there's a maturity model. There's like several of these, oh my gosh, CMMI, all over again in Agile, right? What the frick does it mean? If I can't test that, look, this team's mature. Okay, cool. Let me test that. Take these 2 people out. Or let me throw something at them that they've never had to experience before. Let's see how agile and innovative they really are. That's the true test.
Right? Or me skeptical.
It's not being skeptical. It's actually
no. I'm skeptical of anyone who thinks that they can prove maturity.
Right, exactly. That's exactly because it's continuous and it's constantly changing. And it's so funny. Every company I go to, I say, look, do you have stable, persistent team organized around product? Jay, we can't do that. I said, why can't you do that? Well, that's not how we work. Well, why can't you change that? Well, it's hard. Yeah, life's hard. It's complex. So why should that stop you? Right? So there's real reasons behind why they don't want to do it. It has nothing to do with what they're telling you whatsoever. It has to do with how their bonus, how their performance is, and their social construct in life and their command and control. Okay? Mm-hmm. Y'all know that, right? Mm-hmm. So when you press them on those changes, you always get resistance because you're asking them to give up stuff that they don't want to give up. Mm-hmm. All right, that's the real thing, and you it's a lose-lose deal if you try to do that, right? So then, if I take complexity science and chaos engineering involved, how can I apply that to maybe have a cause and effect for that change?
Ah,
Y'all getting it? It is a war.
so you're suggesting that this is a back door to get the change that you want.
Yeah. If shit happens and you weren't prepared for it and your stock ticket marker went down, dude, you're in trouble. It's really playing politics. I'm hinting here. To apply these things in an organizational structure where there's a lot of politics and everything, this is a leveraging mechanism by which you can make the organization and the culture better off than what they are today by playing a game. It is, I understand what y'all are probably thinking. You should be playing games like this. But those people that are resistant to the change and don't want to, they're playing a game too. And unfortunately, the game they're playing is hurting the company and the employees in the long run. Because they're self.
Yeah.
Okay. So it really bodes to us how much do you want to put yourself into this? So whenever I say, well, you're an agile coach and you're leading an agile transformation, and I look at the data, you know, like the old project management data, all these fail and everything. Well, how much did you put into it?
Just,
Go ahead, Mark.
One short thing. I hope I didn't interrupt you, but it's so complicated because there's a lot of factors I mentioned earlier. One of them is the values of the team. If, for example, they value trust in the sense of do not do stuff with me, I'm not your object, this is gonna go hit the wall. This is not gonna, there's gotta be a particular mindset of resilience under pressure. And they feel like they have the self-responsibility and the autonomy to do stuff about it. Like when you manufacture products and your sales on the market have been decreasing for the past 3 years and you're losing jobs, what are the teams gonna react like? Everybody's gonna be afraid to lose a job, or are they gonna try to make stuff better or reorganize? That's just an example. And the other one is from the engineering side. People who are trained as engineers like me hate stuff that is not engineerable. Like I need to have a model and a process to do this. With systemics, right. It's an oxymoron. It's a contradiction to say I have a process for this. I mean, you already know the problem and its solution, or at least one possible solution to test. But there is no such thing as blindly experimenting. You know, you can be experimenting forever and never converging. So with systemics, you got to attack it from multiple perspectives at the same time, and that's what it takes a non-engineering like mind. And I know that engineers think they're superior to most people, just like finance people think they're superior to everybody else, just like marketing people think they're superior to everybody else. But that's the kind of thinking, meta thinking that you gotta acquire, and it's not from books, unfortunately. I thought I did it from books, but it doesn't work.
Well, books help, but it's working with people and individuals. So when I worked at NASA on some really cool stuff, most of us didn't. Okay, I'll be honest with you. Most of us, we didn't know what the shit we were doing. We just had to figure it out. Okay, there was no book to go read. There's books about the math, but we had to figure out shit that never existed before. No one ever freaking figured it out. Right? There was no handbook to do this. So it's the individuals and the people that was working on the teams. You know, everyone had their strengths and weaknesses, and we had to try to work together and figure out. And you know, we're like family. We pissed each other off sometimes and everything else, but we had to like come together and figure out this complexity, this complex domain. Complex domain means no one's freaking done this before. Okay, there's 5 of us in a room. Okay, bringing our own wisdom and experience in life and our own profession and specialization, and we had to figure it out. That's what I'm talking about. Is if a team can do that, and whatever you throw at them, all this other gaming I talked about, and to test them and their resilience, they'll be able to do it because they've already built. That's the point, which we can't do in most companies. I've already succumbed to the notion that we will never have fully dedicated, 100% dedicated people, persistent teams on a product for most companies in the world. There's a few companies that do it, but I've already given up the idea that I can make I can't make Bank of America do it. I can't make Wells Fargo do it. I can't make an Amex do it. I can just go down the freaking list of companies I've tried. Ford, GM. They still have a person working on 2 or 3 projects, but they're a product and they're a Scrum team. Put in quotes, air quotes. I don't know what your all's experience is, but that's mine.
No, that's it seems to be the case with most of the places I've been working with too. It's unless it's a really small company.
Yeah. If you're a startup in San Francisco, good to go.
Exactly.
But if you work for a multi-billion-dollar, 100-year-old company with 30 or 60 or 100,000 people, yeah, good luck. They're not going to adopt this over. It's not going to happen. That's my experience, and I've tried many times. So now my thinking is, well, what happens if we throw complexity science in there and chaos engineering in there to create the moment of truth where they have to realize it, or the new management or the new young people coming in, because I'm old, the new young people coming in, the new generation saying, cool, dude, yeah, that's what we got to do. Yeah, you've proven it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I was just reading this thing on design thinking. So I've been totally frustrated by including Enterprise Agile, our Enterprise Agile programs on design thinking. It's like, what is this? This is just a bunch of stickies on the wall that we've been doing for all of our lives. What's special about design thinking? And Jared Spool did a piece on it on Medium and said, there isn't anything special except to get all those people who think that design is changing the color background to actually be innovative, and don't tell them.
Well, I think one good thing they have is divergent, convergent thinking, which has been around for decades.
Yes, it's been around for decades. That's what design is supposed to be. But if you look at, the design of, you look at interior designers, right? I mean, they like change the color of your room. I don't want to disparage interior designers, but it's not bringing together a whole bunch of people in order to be innovative, and that's what designers, UX designers do, is bring together a whole bunch of people to be innovative. Except if they call it design, they get a whole bunch of people who say, oh, you want to change the color of the fonts, but if they call it design thinking, now we can sneak in getting everyone to be innovative together.
Yeah, and that's funny because I work with several companies. The company I'm working on right now, they go, we got to do innovations. They have hackathons and innovation days, and they do design thinking. And I'm like, yeah, that's the magic. You'll be innovative
Right.
tomorrow. Yeah, but the true innovative people are the ones working, at night or in the labs, working through crap and trying to figure out stuff. Okay. Whatever their profession is, they're locked into it mentally, and they're trying to figure out whatever it is. So I think that's the secret sauce. Getting the right people together, the right team, the right individuals, where they focus on their profession, their competency, so they exceed. All right, so I pontificated. It's way past time. So if anyone's interested, send me your email. I'm going to try to work with some people, other people I know from a couple of universities and stuff, to see what we can do here. And so that's my hypothesis that I share with everybody. That's what I'm thinking of going forward doing, is try to connect these dots, right? So for example, if I'm doing Scrum or SAFe or less, I would ask, how are you doing with the complexity domain? Okay. How are you doing with complexity adaptive system? Okay, inside the organization or whatever problem you have. I would also ask them, how are you dealing with chaos engineering? How are you creating chaos to find out how the organization and the culture responds? Because you can learn a lot from that. A lot.
Jay, you've been one sneaky dude for a long time.
Hey, it's my job. So that's my big thing. Go ahead.
He's agile and nimble and lean.
That's sneaky.
Yeah, I never know where I'm going from one day next. What's weird is what I focus on in my everyday life is actually applying things in the complicated and the simple domain. So like, for example, we're rolling out lean manufacturing and doing a lot of DMS, and then we're rolling out, all the agile stuff, rolling out SAFe. So my whole life, I've been focused on the complicated and the simple domain of companies and life. Now I'm trying to venture out mentally and say, well, how about all this other stuff that's the only time I've ever experienced that in my life is the team I worked with in NASA. That's the only time I've ever experienced that. And that was interesting. I've never experienced it since, and that was like 30 years ago.
All right, well, you've set us a challenge.
All right, cool.
Jay, so a team that not necessarily attacks something that never been done before, but they've never done it before. Do you consider that complex?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not if they were building a bridge.
Well, bridges have been done before.
Bridge is only complicated.
Right. But I'll give you a perfect example, SpaceX. So what Elon Musk and his team did, where they sent up the rockets and then part of it came down and landed and they reused it.
That was complex.
We never thought in NASA that could ever be done. No one ever thought of it. Ever. So these people said, yeah, shit, that can be done. And we'll make things cheaper. NASA was like, oh yeah, these idiots.
They just thought of it the old way they did things, which was super expensive. He only had $300 million budget, and that was just enough to buy 2.5 rockets. And he hardly could get them. Nobody wanted to sell. He even went to the Russians. He went to everybody. Nobody wanted to sell him. So he said, well, I'm going to have to do it myself. And nobody wanted to work for him because he didn't have a brand. All the experienced rocket scientist guys that could lead such a program. So it was really, really complex in that regard, even humanly.
But they figured it out. It's never been done before. I said, shit, we can figure this out. These are all young people. I'm 65, so everyone's young. So these are all young people. They got together and said, yeah, Elon, we can figure this out. And they have many, many iterations, just like when they did the iPhone with Steve Jobs. They had many, many iterations on the first iPhone before he liked it, right? So it's the same thing that Elon does. And Elon is very automated. I don't know if you know this, but Elon, when he goes at Tesla and SpaceX, if they're having a problem and they can't figure stuff out, Elon is there at the freaking meetings. And he coordinates the conversations with people. If you all can believe that. He actually sleeps there sometimes, which I'm sure his family, his wife and kids probably don't mind at all. But yeah, he's like me, he's neurodivergent, so there's a thing. All right, everyone. Well, thank you. And if you have any interest, let me know. I'll be working with others out there. I'm trying to explore this craziness that I'm going into. If you have any interest, send me an email, and I'll be glad to have you on board.
Intriguing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.